A pact did not fall apart in the moment claws struck flesh. It failed earlier, in the quiet agreements everyone made about whose pain counted and whose did not. Evangeline Blackwood had spent years learning that hierarchy could dress itself in ritual and still be cruelty, that silk and silver could be shackles as easily as symbols, and that applause could sound exactly like a verdict. On the night she was meant to be crowned Luna, with moonfire lanterns floating above the great hall and vows etched into old stone, she understood the final truth beneath all the others. Exile often began in public, because humiliation worked best with witnesses. The feast had reached its loudest, warmest point when Sebastian Darkhollow stood and raised his cup. Music faltered. Wolves turned toward their future Alpha and future Luna. Evangeline rose beside him in ceremonial white shot through with silver thread, the bridal torque cool against her throat, wrists painted with moon ink lines that marked consent and bond. She had been taught since childhood to keep her shoulders open, chin level, smile composed. A proper Luna absorbed scrutiny and gave nothing away. Sebastian did not look at her face when he spoke. "I will not take this bond," he said, voice carrying cleanly to the rafters. "I reject Evangeline Blackwood before the pack, before the Moon Temple, before memory itself." For a breath, no one moved. Then the room inhaled around her, one collective intake of fascination and relief that the blade had landed on someone else. Evangeline felt her knees threaten to give and locked them hard enough to ache. Sebastian set down his cup, turned fully to her, and slid 2 fingers under the torque at her throat. "You hit it well," he said softly, for her alone, though the hall had gone silent enough that silence itself listened. "Defective Omega blood, a blemish in my line." He ripped the torque free. Silver links scattered across stone like sleet. Gasps fluttered. No one objected. Evangeline heard her own voice as if from a distance. "You knew my blood records." "I knew rumors." His mouth curved without warmth. "Now I know certainty." He lifted the torque for all to see, then dropped it at her feet. "Take her beyond our borders before dawn. Strip the mark paint. She keeps what she can carry." She stared at him. This was the man who had taken her hand before elders 3 nights earlier and sworn, in a tone gentle enough to pass as devotion, that he would honor her. She remembered the pressure of his fingers and wondered how a memory could rot this fast. Clarity flooded her mind with brutal force. "Stand upright," she told herself. "Do not beg." If she pleaded, they would call it proof. If she wept, they would call it weakness. If she raged, they would call it madness. Breathe in, count the lanterns, 1, 2, 3, 4. Her body was shaking and she would not let them see. They were waiting for collapse the way scavengers waited for stillness. Do not give them stillness. He had taken the torque, not her name. He had taken a ceremony, not her spine. I was still here. I was still here. I was still here. 2 enforcers seized her arms before she could step back. Their grips were impersonal, practiced. Around the tables, faces shifted away or leaned in, depending on what kind of cowardice they preferred. An elder woman near the hearth made the sign of warding as if Evangeline carried plague. A young scout she had once stitched after training stared fixedly at his plate. "Please," she said, turning toward the council dais, "let me address the temple scribe. If this is lawful, let it be recorded accurately." Sebastian answered for them. "It is lawful because I say it is. Move her." They dragged her from the hall through a side corridor where servants pressed flat to the walls. Someone laughed behind a hand. Someone else whispered, "I always said she was wrong in the bones." At the wash yard, a guard dipped a rag in cold ash water and scrubbed the moon ink from her wrists until her skin burned. Another tore the embroidered veil from her hair and tossed it into the mud. By the hour before dawn, rain had started, thin and needling. They marched her through the south gate and down the stone road that cut between cedar stands. Her white skirts darkened with water and earth, hemline heavy around her ankles. Twice she stumbled, twice they yanked her upright. At the border cairn, marked by stacked black stones and iron bells, the taller enforcer released her with a shove. If we see you inside Packland after sunrise, we collar you and return you to the pits. The other spat into the mud near her foot. Should have stayed grateful, Omega. Evangeline caught herself on her hands, grit biting her palms. Behind her, the bells chimed once as the gate bar dropped back into place. She did not turn around. She listened until footsteps faded and rain swallowed them. Then she was alone. The forest beyond border law was not empty. It merely belonged to no one polite enough to claim it. Wet branches snagged at her sleeves. Night insects resumed their thin, relentless rhythm. She moved downslope by instinct, toward the old watch paths she had memorized as a child, before anyone decided education made Omegas troublesome. Her shoulder throbbed where the enforcer's fingers had dug in. Her throat felt naked and strangely light without the torque, as if she had lost armor she never wanted. Cold slid into her bones. She walked anyway. The breaking point came not at the hall, not at the gate, but at the creek crossing 2 miles out, where moonlight broke through cloud for a single pale strip and showed her the reflection she had avoided all night. Wet hair plastered to her cheeks. Ash streaked across her temple. White bridal silk torn from hip to knee, clinging in gray ribbons. No crown, no packmark, no place. She knelt at the water's edge and tried to wash her hands. The creek carried away mud, then showed her raw skin where ash scrubbing had stripped her wrists. A sound came out of her, low and startled, halfway between laugh and sob. This was what they had wanted, not just banishment, but internal surrender. She pressed both palms to the stones and bowed her head until her forehead touched cold rock. Her breath hitched, steadied, hitched again. If she stayed here until dawn, trackers would find her. If trackers found her, they would collar her, and Sebastian would frame it as mercy. If she returned willingly, he would bind her in law and call it correction. There was no road backward that did not end in a cage. She lifted her head. Not that, she whispered to the creek, to the moon, to whatever part of herself was still listening. Anything but that. She stood and moved east, away from known paths, toward the ruined border watchtower locals called Gray Spire. No patrol used it now because the upper levels had collapsed years earlier after a lightning fire. Smugglers avoided it because the approach was open scree with no cover. That made it useful. Dangerous, but useful. Rain thickened. The slope steepened into shale and broken roots. Once she slipped and slid hard enough to skin her left palm anew. Once she froze as a distant howl rose behind her. Then another answered. Nearer. Trackers. Not formal pursuit, perhaps, but curious wolves sent to make sure exile became disappearance. She cut uphill through thorn scrub, ignoring branches that raked her bare arms. Her lungs burned. Her skirt tore again. Stones shifted beneath her feet with every step, clicking down the slope like warning teeth. The tower emerged at last as a darker shape against darker sky. One jagged wall intact, roof half-caved, iron-bound door hanging crooked on its hinges. A lantern glow moved once inside and vanished. Evangeline stopped 10 paces from the door, chest heaving. She had heard stories of a mercenary sheltering there between contracts, a scarred fighter called Thorn, who sold his blade to border villages and owed allegiance to none. Some stories called him honorable, others called him lethal in ways that made honor irrelevant. Another howl split the night, much closer now. She raised her hand and knocked once, then again, when no answer came. "Please," she said, voice roughened by cold and swallowed panic. "I can pay with work. I only need a wall until dawn." For 3 heartbeats, nothing. Then the door opened a handspan, and a man filled the gap, broad-shouldered beneath a dark wool coat, one cheek crossed by an old silvered scar. His gaze moved over her torn dress, her scraped hands, the mud, the empty throat where a bridle torque should have rested. His eyes were not soft, but they were steady. "Inside," he said. She stepped through. He shut the door and dropped the bar into place just as paws thudded across the shale outside, circling, testing. Evangeline stood in the ruined tower's dim interior, rainwater pooling at her feet, and understood with a sharp, unsteady clarity that she had run out of safe choices and chosen the only one that still felt like hers. The room smelled of wet stone, banked coals, and old pine resin. Evangeline stood where he had left her, fingers curled into the torn silk at her hip, while the man called Thorn crossed to the hearth and smothered the visible flame with a metal plate until only a red seam of heat remained. Outside, claws scraped once along the door. Another set circled the ruined wall. Her pulse climbed into her throat, hard and uneven. Thorn lifted one hand without looking back, a silent command for stillness so absolute that she obeyed before pride could object. He moved like someone who had survived too many nights exactly like this one, conserving every sound, every breath, every flicker that could give them away. A voice called from outside, male and young, trying for confidence and landing on cruelty. "Border orders, surrender the exile and you keep your tower." Thorn slid a short blade from his belt, tested the edge with his thumb, then returned it as if steel were a last resort rather than a first. When he spoke, his tone did not rise. "You are on neutral ground. She belongs to Darkhollow." The words hit her harder than the cold had. Belongs. Thorn's jaw flexed once. He stepped onto the broken stair that wound to the half-collapsed upper platform, disappearing into darkness above. A heartbeat later, loose shale rattled outside, then a yelp cut short, then 2 bodies bolting downslope. No scream, no grand threat, only precision and consequence. The remaining tracker cursed and ran after them. Silence folded back over the tower, wary but real. Thorn descended with a new tear in his coat and a thin line of blood spreading at his side. Evangeline took a step forward on instinct. He noticed, and for the first time his composure slipped. Pain tightened his mouth into something almost feral. "Stay back," he said, then softer. "Not from you. From the blood scent." He pulled open a warped floor hatch near the hearth. Cold air breathed up from below, carrying mineral damp and the faint metallic scent of old iron. "This perch is burned now. We move." She looked at the narrow drop, then at him. "Where does it lead?" "Far enough that their courage dies before their scent trail does." That answer should have sent her running in the opposite direction. Instead, she gathered her skirts and climbed down after him into a stone-throated tunnel that slanted east beneath the ridge. The passage had once been formal, not crude. Fitted blocks, drainage grooves, faded carvings cut waist-high into the wall. She brushed one with her fingertips as they passed and felt the outline of a crowned wolf head ringed by thorn branches. Not Darkhollow work. Older. Royal. They walked until her legs trembled and the raw skin at her wrists burned with each swing of her arms. Thorn kept a steady pace she could match, never hurrying her, never turning the journey into a test she had to fail. By the time the eastern sky paled to pearl through cracks above, the tunnel widened into a hidden ravine sheltered by leaning pines and broken basalt columns. Smoke rose from 2 low stone shelters tucked against the cliff. A pair of sentries emerged with drawn spears, then froze when they saw him. "Commander," the taller one said, bowing his head. The second dropped to one knee before catching himself and standing too quickly, face flushing. "We thought you were still west of the pass." Thorn gave a clipped nod. "Seal the Gray Spire route. Darkhollow trackers tested neutral ground tonight." Their eyes shifted to Evangeline, taking in her ruined bridal white, the ash stains, the scraped hands. She braced for contempt and found something worse and stranger. Recognition mixed with alarm, as if her presence confirmed a rumor they had prayed was false. The kneeling sentry swallowed. "Do we report to the inner court, my Keat?" Thorne's gaze cut to him like a blade. The word died unfinished. "You report to no one but me, until I say otherwise." The ravine went still. Evangeline felt that stillness settle over her skin like pressure before a storm. Mercenaries did not have inner courts. Mercenaries did not silence trained wolves with one look. Fear sharpened into a different thing, a colder intelligence. She had not stumbled into a drifter's den. She had crossed a border she had never seen marked, into territory hidden in plain stone. Under the command of a man everyone obeyed too quickly. He led her to the nearer shelter, shouldering open the door with visible effort now. Inside stood a narrow cot, a rough table, a basin, folded blankets, and a shelf of sealed jars labeled in a neat military hand. Practical. Ordered. Temporary in a way that suggested years. He leaned both palms on the table, breathing hard through his nose. Blood darkened his shirt from ribs to belt. "You are hurt," she said. "I have been worse. And you are lying because it is easier than sitting down." A flicker of dry amusement touched his expression and vanished. "You can rest. There is broth in the pot." She set her jaw. "If you collapse, I am trapped in an unknown ravine with soldiers who call you commander and almost call you something else. Sit." For one suspended beat, she thought he would refuse. Then he lowered himself onto the bench with controlled reluctance, as if yielding cost him more than the wound. She found clean water, thread, needle, a strip of linen. Her hands shook only once as she cut away blood-stuck fabric. The gash along his side was deep but clean, likely from a short blade rather than claws. He watched her work with a predator's stillness, measuring, not threatening. "Name," he said after a moment, "Evangeline Blackwood." "I know who exiled you." His voice roughened on the last word. "I asked your name." She tied the first knot and met his eyes. "Then that is your answer." When fever hit him, it arrived without warning. 1 minute he was rigid under her hands, the next his head bowed and his breath turned ragged, heat rolling from him in waves. She pressed the back of her wrist to his forehead and swore under her breath. He caught her wrist weakly, not to stop her, almost as if anchoring himself. "No temple," he murmured. "No heralds. Keep the name buried." "What name?" His lips barely moved. "Theron Thornwood." The world narrowed to that whisper. He released her and sagged sideways against the table, unconscious or near enough. Evangeline stood very still, pulse thudding in her ears. Theron Thornwood, the vanished royal heir. The Alpha King half the realm claimed dead, and the other half hunted through proxies and lies. She looked at the scar crossing his cheek, at the old wounds mapping his shoulders, at the man who had opened a door to a cast-out Omega without asking what she could offer in return. Then she picked up the needle again, because revelation did not close wounds, and dawn did not wait for disbelief. Light climbed the shelter wall in thin bands as she finished the last stitch. Her own eyelids burned with exhaustion, but alertness held her upright, taut as wire. She reached to clean the blood from his side with warm water, and a bright thread of it slid over her fingers and touched the raw skin at her wrist where ash had stripped her bare. Heat pulsed beneath her skin so fast she gasped. It started at the point of contact and drove inward, straight through sternum and spine. Not pain, not comfort. A force that felt like recognition made physical. Her breath stuttered. A low thrum built in her chest, ancient and wild, and her instincts sharpened to a knife edge. Storm pine and iron flooded the room, fresh and fierce, as if the forest itself had leaned through the doorway. Across from her, Theron jerked awake with a sharp intake of breath, pupils blown wide. Amber bled into his irises, then molten gold overtook the color entirely. His fingers spasmed on the table. Claws punched through skin at the tips, curved and lethal, scraping grooves in the wood. He recoiled from her so abruptly the bench skidded, shoulders striking the stone wall. Shock crossed his face first, then hunger, then a disciplined terror that looked practiced. "No," he said hoarsely, more to himself than to her. "No, not now." Evangeline could not move. The bond pull tightened like a river current around her ribs, dragging her attention toward him no matter where she looked. Every beat of her heart answered his. Every breath found his scent and kept it. She had been told her whole life that omegas like her were lesser, diluted, useful only when obedient, disposable when inconvenient. Yet in this charged silence her body knew something the council never had. This was not diminution. This was magnitude. This was claim without ownership, hunger without degradation, a door opening where there had only been walls. I am afraid of this. I am starving for this. I do not know which fear is mine, and which was planted in me by people who needed me small. He could tear me apart in one motion, and still my body steps toward him because the part of me that learned truth from touch has already chosen. If this is a trap, it is one woven by fate itself. If this is salvation, it arrived wearing scars and a false name and blood on his hands from defending a woman he did not know. I should run. I should question everything. I should protect what remains of my dignity like a last coin in a thief market. Yet when I look at him, the lie that I am nothing cannot keep its shape. Theron dragged a shaking hand down his face, forcing his claws to retract one by one with visible effort. "Do not say it," he said. She swallowed. "Say what?" "My name." His gaze locked to hers, feral and pleading in equal measure. "The real one. Names make chains, and mine makes wars." Outside, a sentry called a shift change, distant and ordinary, while inside the shelter the world held on a single wire between them. Evangeline's wrist still burned where his blood had touched her. Theron stood braced against stone as if proximity itself were battle. Neither looked away. Neither looked away. Evangeline felt the pull between them like a drawn bowstring, dangerous because it was true. She forced air into her lungs and lowered her gaze first, not in surrender, but in discipline. "I will not use it," she said quietly. "Not unless you ask me to." Some of the strain left his shoulders, though his jaw stayed locked. Good. He pushed off the wall and took one careful step toward the table, then another, moving as if each choice had to pass through pain and caution. When he reached for the water basin, his hand shook hard enough to rattle ceramic against wood. Evangeline moved on instinct, then stopped herself when he flinched. The silence that followed was raw and oddly formal. "Tell me what you need," she said. His eyes lifted to hers, amber now, the gold banked but not gone. "Distance," for a moment. She nodded and stepped back to the far side of the shelter. He braced both palms on the table, breathing through his mouth until the tremor in his hands eased. Only then did he sit. The control in that small act unsettled her more than the claws had. He had strength enough to overrun her, authority enough to command this whole ravine, and yet he was negotiating with himself, as if her safety mattered as much as his survival. A knock sounded at the outer door. One of the sentries spoke through the wood. "Commander, scouts posted. No tales from the west. Do you want the healer called?" Theron did not look away from Evangeline when he answered. "No healer. Bring food for two and leave it outside." Bootsteps retreated. She watched him reach for a strip of linen and press it over the stitched wound, his movements efficient and unsentimental. "You refuse help often?" she asked. "Often enough." "Because of secrecy, or because you do not trust anyone?" A brief, humorless curve touched his mouth. Those are the same question. The food arrived in a covered pot and 2 chipped bowls. Theron waited until the steps faded, then opened the door, collected the tray, and barred it again. He set one bowl near her and retreated to the opposite end of the table, giving her a clear path to the door, to the hatch, to any exit she might choose. It was deliberate. She saw it, and he knew she saw it. "I am not your prisoner," she said. "No." He took a spoonful of broth, winced as he swallowed, and set the spoon down. "You are also not obligated to stay." The words landed heavily because they were offered without performance. Outside this room, men spoke of duty when they meant ownership. Sebastian had spoken of law when he meant appetite. Theron, who carried a hidden crown and enough violence to silence a pack, was handing her choice in plain language and asking nothing in return. By late afternoon, the rain had thinned to a fine mist that silvered the ravine stones, and exhaustion finally took her by force. She lay down on the cot fully dressed, intending only to close her eyes for a minute. Sleep came like falling through ice. In the dream, she was back in the feast hall, barefoot on cold stone, while wolves watched with bright, avid faces. Sebastian stood at the dais holding her torn torque in one hand and an iron collar in the other. Each time she tried to speak, ash filled her mouth. He smiled gently, the way he had during courtship, and said, "You confused politeness for mercy." The crowd laughed. Someone dragged her wrists behind her back. Bells rang and rang and rang. She jerked awake with a choking sound, half upright, blind with panic. The shelter was dark except for the hearth's low red glow. Her hands were clenched so hard her nails had cut crescents into her palms. She could not feel her feet, could not draw a full breath. Somewhere close, a chair scraped softly. Theron stood near the door, still as carved granite. He did not approach. "You are awake," he said, voice low. "You are in the ravine shelter. No one is touching you." Her throat worked without sound. He dipped his head once, as if acknowledging terms in a negotiation. "May I come closer?" She managed a small nod. He crossed the room slowly, stopping an arm's length from the cot. In his hands was the heavy fur-lined cloak she had seen him wearing at Grey Spire, dark wool, weather-worn at the edges. He held it out, waiting. When she gave a second nod, he laid it over her shoulders with precise care, avoiding her skin, making sure her hands stayed free. The warmth hit first, then the scent. Pine smoke, leather, rain, and that iron note that now lived under her own pulse. A shaky exhale left her. She hated that her body was trembling again. Theron crouched by the hearth, lifted a small pot, and poured broth into a cup. He set it on the table beside her, then chose the floor near the door rather than the chair by her bed, settling with his back to stone and one knee drawn up, a sentinel's posture that left her space intact. "Drink when you can," he said. She wrapped both hands around the cup, not drinking yet, only absorbing heat. After a long moment, she whispered, "You did not wake me. You were fighting your way out. Waking a cornered wolf can end badly." "I am not a wolf worth naming, remember?" His expression sharpened. "Do not repeat their verdict in my shelter." The quiet force in that sentence loosened something tight behind her ribs. She looked down at her hands and noticed dried blood across her palms, old and dark from the climb and the creek, and the ash-scrubbed skin she had reopened in sleep. Before she could hide them, he noticed too. "May I?" he asked. It took her a second to understand. Then she extended her hands. He rose, brought the basin, and knelt in front of her like a man tending ritual silver. He dipped a cloth in warm water, wrung it out, and cleaned each palm with patient, reverent care, easing blood from the cuts without reopening them. No haste, no roughness, just attention so steady it almost hurt to receive. She watched his scarred fingers and heard herself ask, "Who did this to you?" He glanced up once, then back to her hands. Most of it came from a succession war that should never have happened. Everyone says that about wars after they win. His mouth tightened, accepting the strike. Then the version they tell you leaves out the beginning. He rinsed the cloth. My uncle wanted the throne quickly. Quick meant fear. Fear meant examples. Villages accused of feeding the wrong banner were to be burned. Families, too, if they sheltered deserters. He pressed the cloth gently to the base of her thumb. I was ordered to lead one of those purges. Evangeline went very still. I refused, he said. Refusal split the command. Wolves died who should have lived. Wolves lived who were meant to die. The scars were payment in both directions. And you ran. I disappeared. He set her clean hands on the cloak, palms up. Running is what cowards do to avoid consequence. I accepted mine. I would not accept theirs. She stared at him, at the controlled grief in his face, and a different understanding took shape. This man had not vanished to save his pride. He had stepped out of power because power demanded ugliness he would not enact. Inside her, thought and feeling tangled and then aligned. I am always braced for the turn, for kindness revealing teeth, for debt hidden inside every gift. That is the arithmetic I was taught. Receive and pay, obey and survive, disappear and be spared. But he is not bargaining. He is not asking for gratitude he can weaponize later. He asks permission to step closer. He places food where I can refuse it. He sits by the door like a guard dog who has chosen my threshold over his own sleep. If this is strategy, it is the strangest one I have ever seen. If this is care, then I do not know where to set it in my body, because no one made room for it there. I am frightened of wanting it. I am more frightened of walking away from the first person who looked at my wounds and did not call them proof. She drank the broth in slow, careful swallows. Theron remained at the door until her breathing steadied and her eyelids grew heavy again. Just before sleep took her, she heard him murmur, almost too soft to catch. You are safe here tonight. Morning arrived clear and sharp. A pale sun struck the tops of the pines and turned the ravine mist to gold haze. Theron was already outside when she stepped from the shelter. Cloak wrapped tight, hair braided back with leather cord one of the sentries had silently offered. 2 saddled horses waited near the lower path. We travel east, Theron said. Short route, open terrain. Faster, but visible. Visible to whom? Everyone. She met his gaze. Good. They rode side by side through broken highland and cedar flats until the path narrowed toward a river cut deep between slate banks. A rope bridge had been replaced by a stone ford and checkpoint since she last saw this place. Dark Hollow patrol colors snapped from 2 poles, and 3 wolves in partial shift stood at the crossing with collar chains looped at their belts. The lead patrolman squinted, recognition hitting like a sneer. Well, the discarded bride. Evangeline kept her spine straight and her hands loose on the reins. He stepped forward, eyes dropping to her bare throat. By blood law, rejected mates remain property until temple nullification. You come with us. Collar first, questions later. One of the others laughed under his breath. Sebastian will pay double for this one. Theron dismounted in one fluid movement and came to stand between Evangeline's horse and the patrol. He did not bare teeth or raise his voice. He simply let his command roll out, vast and crushing, the invisible pressure of an apex predator filling the ford until even the river seemed to hush. The patrol wolves staggered a half step, instincts forcing their chins down. Listen carefully, he said, each word clipped and resonant. Any hand laid on Evangeline Blackwood will be treated as treason against my command. The lead patrolman swallowed hard, fighting the instinct to kneel. Who are you to invoke treason on Dark Hollow land? Theron's gaze went glacial. You crossed neutral charter markers 3 miles back. Learn your maps before you cite law. The wolf reached for a collar chain anyway, bravado wrestling panic. Theron moved so fast the chain never cleared the belt. He caught the man's wrist, twisted just enough to force release, and shoved him back without breaking bone. "Do not test me twice." Evangeline slid from her horse and stepped into clear view, refusing to hide behind him even as his aura throbbed like distant thunder. The patrolman looked from her to Theron, recalculating. "She belongs to Alpha Sebastian," he spat, weaker now. Theron did not look at her when he answered, and she understood why a beat later. "No. She stands under my protection by her choice." Then, still facing the patrol, he asked, "Evangeline, speak your will." The moment opened wide. No coercion hidden in it. No staged answer. She heard the river over stone, smelled wet moss and horse sweat, felt 3 hostile stares and 1 steady presence waiting without pressing. Her voice came clear. "I choose my own path. I do not submit to Dark Hollow claim." Witnesses mattered in this world. So did wording. The youngest patrol wolf lowered his eyes first, shaken by what he had heard and perhaps by what he had never imagined a woman could say aloud at a checkpoint. The lead man cursed, but he stepped back. "This is not finished," he said. "No," Theron replied. "It is documented." He released the aura in measured increments, like easing pressure from a blade edge. The patrol retreated to their side of the ford, pride in tatters, chains untouched. Theron turned then, not triumphant, only alert, scanning for flanks and ambush points before he reached for Evangeline's reins and handed them back. "You all right?" he asked. She almost laughed at the simplicity of it, at the fact that after power had just rippled through stone and muscle and law, he still asked like a man checking whether she had eaten. "I am now." They crossed the river together. Not with him leading and her trailing. Together, boots and hooves in the same cold current, shoulders aligned against the pull. On the far bank, the road widened into sunlit grassland, and for the first time since the feast hall, she did not feel like she was being driven somewhere against her will. She glanced at him, then made a choice that felt small and enormous at once. She reached out and caught his hand for 1 brief second before letting go. His fingers tightened around hers in answer. Once, deliberate. When they started walking again, she did not count exits. She counted steps beside him. She counted steps beside him, and on the 12th, Theron slowed, turning his head just enough to listen past wind and water. "Riders," he said. Evangeline heard them a breath later, not close, but organized. 4 horses, maybe 5, moving the old military cadence of scouts trained to report before they fought. Theron guided them off the road into a stand of alder and waited until a patrol crossed the ridge above, cloaks marked with the silver thorn crest she had seen carved in the tunnel stone. Their captain spotted Theron, touched fist to heart, and veered down without hesitation. "My command," the captain said, dismounting. She was broad-shouldered, middle years, scar over one brow, and she looked at Evangeline with frank assessment rather than disdain. "Messages from west and south. Both urgent." Theron took the first tube, cracked wax, read, and went still in the dangerous way of a man narrowing toward action. He handed it to Evangeline. The document bore Moon Temple seals and Sebastian's signature across the bottom in thick black strokes. By decree of ritual correction, the rejected female Evangeline Blackwood remains under lawful bond pending defect review. Public rejection rendered invalid due concealed lineage misrepresentation. Custodial return required under blood law. Resistance constitutes theft of alpha property and treason against temple order. Her stomach dropped hard enough she tasted metal. "It is forged," she said, though she already knew that certainty alone could not protect her. Most wolves did not read seals. They obeyed the shape of authority. The captain passed Theron the second tube. He read it aloud for her this time, voice stripped to iron. "Royal Bounty Notice. verified witness payment for intelligence leading to capture of fugitive claimant Theron Thornwood, accused of abandoning throne during succession crisis and destabilizing pack unity. He folded the paper once, precise and lethal. That one is also forged in origin and true in effect. The captain swore under her breath. Copies are already posted in way stations. Dark Hollow runners are buying agreement from hungry border packs. Evangeline looked from one notice to the other and understood the architecture of Sebastian's cruelty with cold clarity. He was not choosing between vengeance and power. He had built a mechanism that gave him both. If wolves accepted the temple writ, he could drag her back in chains and call it law. If they accepted the bounty, every opportunist in 3 territories would hunt Theron and call it duty. Together, the two lies trapped them on opposite blades. Protect her, and Theron exposed himself. Hide Theron, and she vanished into Sebastian's legal cage. "Where are these being read publicly?" Evangeline asked. "Every market road between Dark Hollow and the eastern ridges," the captain said. "And at dusk in the old oath courts, so elders can claim witness." Theron's gaze cut to her. "We do not move by roads now." She should have agreed immediately. Strategy demanded it. But another thought struck first, sharp as flint. The orphan den. His expression changed. "What den?" "The mill vault near Ash Creek. 3 pups sleep there when patrol pressure rises." Her voice turned ragged on the last word. "I left food caches for months. No one knew except a temple novice and 1 baker widow." The captain's curse this time was louder. "If Dark Hollow traced your route?" "They traced everything," Evangeline finished. Theron gave orders in clipped sequence. 2 riders to sweep the mill, 2 to confirm every posted writ and seize originals where possible, 1 to the nearest neutral oathkeeper with demand for seal verification. No one moved until he finished, and when they did, it was immediate, disciplined. Command sat on him like second skin, not performance, not borrowed authority, but the underlying structure of who he had always been. When the riders were gone, silence settled between the trees. Evangeline could not stop staring at the forged temple decree in her hand. The wax looked right at a glance: crescent, pillar, laurel ring. Then she noticed the flaw she would have missed months ago and now could never ignore. Temple laurel leaves were always 11. This seal bore 10. "They count on speed," she said, "not scrutiny." Theron watched her, not the paper. "A primary consideration is what Sebastian thinks you will do next. Panic, run, hide behind you. And," she lifted her chin, "I have done enough hiding for 1 lifetime." By the second night after the crossing, they reached an abandoned granary deep in thorn country that Theron's network used as a rotating safe house. Rain drummed on slate, wolves rotated watch in silence, and every entry was checked twice because forged law had made even neutral roads unstable. The riders sent to Ash Creek returned after midnight with mud to their knees and grief in their eyes. The mill vault had been emptied. No bodies, no scent trail that held longer than 10 yards because someone had flooded the floor with lamp oil and ash. On the stone wall where the pups once scratched height marks, Sebastian's men had carved a crescent hook around a single word: mine. Evangeline stood with both hands braced on the table while the report was given. She listened to each detail once and asked for it, repeated exactly, then once more. Distinctive marks mattered under oath law: lamp oil, ash masking, crescent hook, the carved word. She made the captain repeat the number of prints in the mud. 7 adults, 3 small paw sets dragged in places. No one interrupted her questions. When the door closed and they were alone, the quiet between her and Theron felt charged and frayed. He reached for the kettle, poured hot water over crushed mint, and set the cup near her without touching her wrist. "You are shivering," he said. "I am furious." "That too." She almost snapped at the calm in his tone, then saw the strain under it, the way he kept flexing his left hand as if claws wanted out and were being denied by force. Attraction had not softened anything between them. It had made every moment sharper. She knew how close he stood by the change in her breathing. She knew the exact cadence of his steps now, the scrape of callus against ceramic when he set a cup down. Knowing did not make this safer. It made fear more intimate. I want him close when the room goes cold. I want him near enough that my pulse can find his and steady. I am afraid of how quickly my body learned that language. I am afraid that loving strength means handing over my throat again. But this is not Sebastian's court. Theron asks, then waits. He does not dress control his care. If I reach for him now, it will be because I choose it, not because law cornered me. That difference is non-trivial. That difference is my whole life. She lifted the cup and drank. If Sebastian posts those writs long enough, some oath keepers will accept them just to avoid conflict. Evidence suggests half already have, Theron said. Fear makes efficient bureaucracy. She gave him a weary, incredulous look. Did you just turn tyranny into an administrative problem? His mouth shifted, almost a smile. I contain multitudes. The laugh that escaped her was brief and startled, but real. It broke the room's tension for one fragile moment. Then a knock sounded. 3 short, 1 long. Scout pattern. Theron opened the door to Captain Mara. Rain slicked Mara's braids to her collar, and she held a sealed packet wrapped in oilskin. Intercepted at the South Ford, she said. Dark Hollow courier carrying 12 copies to Market Courts. Theron passed the packet to Evangeline first. Inside lay fresh decrees, a list of bounty rates by rank, and a private memorandum addressed to Counsel Elder Bramwell in Sebastian's hand. Public display of reclamation must occur at Ancient Stone Circle for maximum witness. Female must be collared before moonrise. Once Thornwood identity confirmed, announce King's cowardice and issue open contract. Crowd fury will do the rest. Evangeline read it twice. The old wedding site. The same circle where Sebastian had once practiced vows with her in daylight and lied with perfect composure. He wanted spectacle more than capture. He wanted to break her where memory would amplify humiliation. Mara set one more item on the table, a small bronze temple stamp, chipped at the edge. Found in courier saddlebag, counterfeit die, Smith's mark filed off. Physical evidence, portable, damning, and suddenly worth lives. Theron met Mara's eyes. Locket in the iron chest, 2 witnesses on every transfer. Mara nodded and left. Rain deepened toward dawn, then cleared by afternoon into brittle sunlight. Reports came in waves. 2 oath courts had accepted Sebastian's writ pending review. 1 had rejected it after seal count mismatch. 3 minor pacts declared neutrality while quietly collecting bounty notices anyway. External contact from the neutral oath keeper arrived at dusk by coded flare. Temple registry page for Evangeline's rejection entry had been cut out. Not amended. Not amended. Removed. Sebastian was not just forging documents. He was editing memory infrastructure, turning record-keeping itself into a weapon. That made him more dangerous than any brute with claws, because systems outlived battles. Theron studied the map spread across the granary table, then looked at her with deliberate steadiness. We can keep moving and make him chase shadows. And the pups? His silence answered first. At moonrise on the 3rd day, the strike came. No warning howl, no frontal assault. A single courier wolf in neutral gray reached their outer watch and requested parley under messenger protection law. Mara brought him in stripped of weapons and flanked by 2 guards. He was young, hands shaking, eyes fixed on Evangeline with the look of someone delivering poison he had not brewed. For you, he said, and held out a carved memory shard no larger than her palm. Theron's posture changed instantly, predator and king at once. Who sent it? I was paid to carry, not to ask. Mara took the shard, checked for binding traps, then placed it on the table. When Evangeline touched the etched runes, moonlight pooled across the grainy surface and a projection rose into the center of the room. Ancient stone circle, night wind, torches. 3 small figures were visible behind the central altar, secured with chain lines fixed to standing posts. Frightened but upright, faces streaked with dirt. Nico's crooked ear, Pell's patched sleeve, Bryn clutching the others with white-knuckled determination. Alive. Sebastian stepped into frame wearing dark ceremonial leather, his expression composed, almost tender in the way predators sometimes appeared before they struck. Evangeline, he said to the recording, as if speaking across a dinner table. You always did care for strays. Return to the circle alone by next moonrise and submit to lawful reclamation. Kneel, accept collar, and publicly confirm your bond to me under blood law. Refuse, and I end this lesson where our vows were meant to stand. He smiled, turning slightly so the watchers around him could be seen. Mixed pack colors, hired witnesses, opportunists scenting chaos. Bring your mercenary if you like. I would enjoy introducing the realm to Theron Thornwood, the king who hides behind an Omega's skirts. The image flickered and died. No one moved for 2 full breaths. Then the courier, voice-breaking, added, He told me to repeat 1 line exactly if the shard failed. He swallowed. Return alone and submit, or the children pay first. Theron's hand came down on the table hard enough to crack the edge. Amber flooded his eyes, bright and feral, and then he forced it back with visible effort, because rage now would cost precision later. Mara was already issuing orders at the door for perimeter lockdown and fast scouts to verify the circle count. Evangeline stood very still, staring at the dead shard. Fear rose, cold and clean, but beneath it another current gathered, purpose, sharp enough to cut through panic. Sebastian had chosen venue, witnesses, legal theater, and hostages. He thought that framework made him unassailable. She turned to Theron. He wants me silent, collared, and alone in a ring built for public memory. Theron's voice was rough with contained violence. You are not going. I am. Not alone. She held his gaze and felt the forbidden truth pressing at the back of her teeth. The name he had warned her never to spend unless war required it. Outside, a horn sounded twice from the North Watch. Scouts returning fast. Inside, Evangeline touched the hollow of her throat, where silver had once been ripped away, and said, with terrifying calm, If we walk into that circle, I may need to break your 1 rule. Theron held her gaze for a long beat, the cracked table between them, Scout's horns still echoing from the North Watch. Then we do this clean, he said at last, voice like gravel under steel. No hidden blades, no surprise strike from our side. You speak, I hold the line, and every witness sees who breaks law first. Evangeline nodded once. Her pulse was loud, but steadying. I want Mara and 2 oathkeepers in the inner ring. I want the courier kept alive and present. I want the counterfeit stamp, the forged writs, and the memorandum read aloud before anyone touches those children. Theron's expression shifted from raw fury to focused command. Done. Mara re-entered at a near run as if summoned by thought. Orders moved fast after that, each one clipped and exact. The physical evidence went into the iron chest and out again under double witness. The neutral oathkeeper who had signaled by flare arrived before dawn with a junior scribe and a travel archive of temple seal matrices. The courier, pale and shaking, repeated his route and payment details into record, while Mara marked every word. By first light, 2 independent scouts confirmed the stone circle was already crowded with mixed-pack observers and hired blades. Sebastian had built his theater exactly as promised. By late afternoon, wind rushed down from the ridges and turned the grassland silver in waves. They rode for the old Oath Road in open formation, No concealment now, because concealment would feed his narrative. Evangeline rode at the center by her own insistence, not shielded behind Theron but flanked equally by Mara and him. 3 days had taught her the geometry of power in this world, and tonight she would redraw it publicly or die trying. I am afraid. I am still going. I can feel fear in my hands, in the space behind my ribs, in the memory of ash scrubbed into my skin until I bled. But fear is not command. Not anymore. He thinks the circle is his stage because he chose the torches and the witnesses and the chains. He thinks law is whatever he can force people to repeat fast enough. I know better now. Law is memory plus witness plus courage. At the exact moment silence looks safer. I was trained to endure. Tonight I choose to testify. Tonight I choose to be seen on my own terms. The ancient stone circle rose out of the hillside like exposed bone, each standing stone carved with oath knots and old lunar script. Torches burned in iron cradles, smoke twisting sideways in the wind. Wolves ringed the perimeter in layered ranks. Dark Hollow loyalists in front, neutral packs behind them, opportunists at the edges weighing which way profit would fall. At the center stood Sebastian in ceremonial black, one hand resting on a collar chain clipped to his belt. Behind him, near the altar, 3 pups were secured to stone posts with short iron lengths. Nico spotted Evangeline first and went rigid with hope and terror both. Pell pressed close to Bryn, who lifted her chin with stubborn, shaking bravery. Sebastian smiled when she entered the torchlight. "There she is," he called, projecting to the crowd. "Our wayward bride returns to reason." Theron moved to her left flank, one step behind by choice, while Mara and the 2 Oathkeepers advanced to the witness stones. Murmurs rippled as seal boxes were opened and tablets set out. Sebastian's gaze cut to Theron and sharpened. "And the stray guard dog attends. Convenient. Saves me a hunt." Evangeline did not answer him yet. She walked to the center marker and stopped on the moon-etched disc where vows were meant to be spoken by equals. "Under goddess law," she said, clear and carrying, "I invoke trial by truth." The crowd noise dropped hard like a blade drawn free. Sebastian laughed once, dismissive. "Denied. You stand under reclamation writ." "Then let your writ survive scrutiny." Evangeline extended her hand to the nearest oathkeeper. "Present the decree." A rolled parchment changed hands. The keeper broke the wax in full view. His junior scribe counted laurel leaves aloud, voice wavering at first, then firming. 10. The second keeper opened the temple matrix archive, turned pages with practiced precision, and held up the official seal impression beside the forged one. "Temple laurel is 11. This die is counterfeit." Sebastian's smile thinned. Clerical quibbling. Mara stepped forward and placed the chipped bronze stamp on the altar stone. "Recovered from your courier saddlebag, with 12 copies and private instruction memorandum." The memorandum was read out by the junior scribe, each word about collared display and crowd fury landing like stones in water. Wolves shifted in the outer ring. No one cheered. Sebastian snapped his fingers. 4 enforcers in partial shift moved at once, 2 toward Evangeline, 2 toward the pups. Chaos threatened to break in all directions. Theron's command slammed outward in a controlled wave, not to dominate witnesses but to freeze the first illegal strike. The 2 wolves rushing Evangeline buckled to a knee, breath punched from them by instinctive submission. At the altar, 1 enforcer still reached for Bryn's chain. Theron was there in 2 strides, catching the chain and tearing the ring bolt from stone with a crack of iron. Mara's guards surged to seal the pups behind a shield wall. Sebastian roared, pupils shifting, claws lengthening as he launched into a partial shift and drove straight for Evangeline's throat. She did not retreat. She took the oath blade from the altar, sliced her palm in one clean motion, and pressed blood to the center glyph. Moon script ignited under her hand, silver white and unforgiving. "Trial accepted," she said into the flare of light. Then, breaking the one rule that had framed everything between them, she lifted her voice and named him under moon witness. Theron Thornwood. The name rolled across stone like thunder finding its mountain. Every wolf in the circle felt the impact. Theron went still, then forward, something ancient and sovereign rising in his bearing with no room left for concealment. Sebastian faltered mid-lunge for half a heartbeat, and half a heartbeat was enough. Evangeline opened the bond thread and let memory pour, not spectacle. Evidence lived as sensation. The feast hall, silence. The torque ripped from her throat. Sebastian's words, sharp and intimate. The ash water on her wrists. The message shard with chained pups and his own recorded demand. Fear from 3 small bodies in moonlight. The crowd did not just hear it. They felt it in their nerves and lungs and marrow. Wolves staggered, hands to temples, growls turning uncertain. Trial by truth lit each standing stone in sequence, confirming transmission. Sebastian bared his teeth and forced himself through the pressure, swinging at her with a clawed hand. The strike clipped her shoulder, spun her half around, and tore fabric, but she kept her feet. Pain flashed hot, then narrowed into focus. She saw the old mark scar at his neck where he had once gripped her in private ritual practice, now a broken crescent line never completed into bond. Conduit. She planted her bleeding palm against that scar and drove moonfire through the trial glyph. Light surged up his throat and locked him in place mid-motion, every muscle seizing without tearing, body held by law rather than brute force. He gasped, furious and suddenly afraid. "What are you doing?" "Returning memory to the record," she said, breath ragged. "Where you can't edit it." Trial flared again. This time it replayed his own voice into the ring from the captured shard and from his imprint on Oathstone both. "Return alone and submit, or the children pay first." Then, over it, older and colder, from the wedding feast memory, defective Omega blood. "Take her beyond our borders before dawn." The watching packs recoiled as if struck. One by one, wolves wearing dark hollow colors pulled the rank cords from their own wrists and dropped them to the dirt. A council runner stepped back from Sebastian entirely. Another tore dark hollow pins from his collar and threw them at the altar. Allegiance was leaving in real time. Sebastian fought the hold, veins standing at his neck. "You twist context." "She was always unstable. This is sedition." Evangeline held his gaze. "You cast me out as nothing." His lip curled. "You were always mine." She answered without raising her voice. "I was never yours." Theron stepped into the center then, no longer hidden, no longer deniable, his presence drawing every eye in the circle. Gold burned in his irises, but his tone was judicial, exact. By trial confirmed under moon witness, by counterfeit proven, by child abduction witnessed, and by coercive blood law abuse, Sebastian Darkhollow is stripped of rank and claim. He nodded once to the oath keepers. Record sentence. The senior keeper's voice carried despite shaking hands. "Sentence requested?" Theron did not look away from Sebastian. "Banishment to the dead expanse. Name stricken from pack records. No banner, no office, no reclamation rights, no appeal until 3 full moons survive beyond boundary, and petition is sponsored by 2 neutral alphas." A collective intake ran through the crowd. Death might have made a martyr. This made a warning. Sebastian's control finally cracked. "You cannot do this. I am blooded alpha." "Were," Mara said, and stepped in with iron cuffs etched for oath restraint. As the cuffs sealed, trial fire burned across Sebastian's rank marks and erased them, line by line, until his forearms showed only bare skin and old scars. He sagged, not from injury, but from the sudden absence of authority he had mistaken for identity. Theron turned to the gathered packs. Any challenge to sentence? Silence. Then the neutral captains bowed, one after another. Mara's guards took Sebastian toward the east boundary under full witness escort. He twisted once to look back at Evangeline, hatred and disbelief warring in his face, but he had no command left to put behind either. The circle held. At the altar, Bryn broke from the shield line and ran to Evangeline, stopping short only long enough for permission. Evangeline dropped to her knees and opened her arms. All three pups collided with her at once, shaking, alive, stubbornly brave. She held them while the torches hissed in the wind and the old stones cooled from silver to gray. And for the first time since the feast hall, no one tried to drag her anywhere at all. No one tried to drag her anywhere at all, and the strangeness of that freedom made Evangeline's knees shake harder than the fight had. Bryn clung to her neck. Nico pressed against her side, Pel's small hands fisted in her torn sleeve, and she held them until their breathing began to match hers instead of sprinting ahead in panic. Theron crouched beside them, keeping his hands visible and his voice low. "You are safe now," he told the pups. "Captain Mara is taking you to warm food and a guarded tent, 2 guards at the door, 1 healer inside, and Evangeline can visit as soon as she chooses." Bryn studied him with fierce suspicion, then looked to Evangeline for the answer. Evangeline nodded. "Go with Mara. I'll come as soon as the records are done." Mara stepped in, gentler than her scarred face suggested, and the children let themselves be guided away. Before she left, she handed Evangeline a folded wool wrap and murmured, "Boundary escort just sent signal." Sentence carried. Sebastian crossed into dead expanse alive, under witness. Cuffs removed at the marker and his name struck from the travel slate. Alive. Gone. No martyr's pyre to rally around. Evangeline closed her eyes once, then opened them to the ring of standing stones and the waiting officials. The senior oathkeeper beckoned them to the altar table. Evidence chain must be closed before moonset. His hands still trembled, but procedure steadied him. One by one, the physical proofs were laid out and logged in front of all remaining witnesses. The forged reclamation writ with 10-leaf laurel, the copied bounty notices, Sebastian's private memorandum, the chipped counterfeit temple stamp, and the memory shard that had carried his threat. Mara read each origin and transfer point aloud. The courier, wrapped in a borrowed cloak and still pale, confirmed his route and payment before placing his thumbprint on the wax ledger. Then the neutral keeper produced a sealed packet. "Outcome of your flare inquiry," he said to Theron and Evangeline. "Temple registry page for rejection entry was cut out, as reported. We verified from Mirror Archives in the North Vault and restored certified copies tonight. Elder Bramwell accepted bribes to suppress that page. He is removed pending trial." Theron inclined his head. "Entered." "Entered." The scribe echoed, writing fast. Captain Mara set the iron chest on the altar and locked the remaining originals inside with 2 keys, one kept by each oathkeeper. Independent custody begins now. Around them, wolves who had come for spectacle watched a bureaucracy of truth being rebuilt in real time, and Evangeline felt an unexpected surge of relief. Not vengeance, structure. The opposite of everything Sebastian had relied on. When the last seal was pressed and witnessed, the keepers stepped back. The crowd thinned in waves, captains calling their packs home. Torches hissed lower. Wind moved through carved stone like a long exhale. Near the outer ring, the young patrol wolf from the river ford paused, met Evangeline's eyes, and touched fist to heart before leaving with his unit. He said nothing, but he did not look away. Silence gathered at the center. Theron turned to her fully then. The wild command that had filled him in battle had settled into something quieter and more dangerous, complete sincerity. He removed his gloves and set them on the altar as if laying down rank. Then, in the same circle where she had been stripped and shamed, he dropped to one knee. Every remaining witness stilled. "Evangeline Blackwood," he said, voice carrying without force. "I have asked you for trust in ruins, on roads, and in war. I ask now in light. Do you freely choose me, knowing my true name, my scars, and the throne I can no longer pretend is not mine?" The question struck her like the first clear bell after a storm. No coercion, no legal trap hidden in pretty words. Choice, plain and public. She stepped closer until their knees nearly touched. Her hands shook as she lifted her hair and bared the line where neck met shoulder, pulse fluttering hard beneath skin. "I choose you," she said, freely, completely. Theron searched her face one last time, as if confirming there was no fear he had mistaken for consent. Finding none, he rose just enough, braced one hand at her waist, and lowered his mouth to her throat. The bite was sharp, clean, and real enough to draw a gasp from her lips. Pain flashed white for a heartbeat, then transformed almost immediately into a spreading warmth that poured through her chest and limbs like molten sunlight braided with cool river silver. The rejected scar Sebastian had left years ago, faint crescent, constant reminder, burned once, and dissolved under the new bond light. Evangeline gripped Theron's shoulders, not to push him away, but to stay upright as sensation cascaded through her in waves. Grief unhooking from old shame, fury settling into strength, hunger becoming home. Theron pulled back, breathing rough, his forehead resting against hers, gold and silver light threaded between them, visible even in the dying torch glow, circling wrists and sternum before sinking beneath skin. "Mine," he whispered, reverent, not possessive. Evangeline cupped his jaw, turned him slightly, and bared her own teeth. "Yours," she answered, "and you are mine." She bit him at the shoulder, deliberate and answering, teeth sinking through leather and skin to mark, not wound. He shuddered under her hands, a low sound breaking from his chest as bonfire surged the other direction. She felt it then, fully mutual. His remembered winter of refusal in the Succession War. Villages he had not burned. Names he still carried. The lonely discipline of Grey Spire. The instant in the shelter when he chose distance over taking. In return, he felt her creekside vow in the rain, the humiliation in the feast hall, the relentless refrain that had kept her standing, "I was still here," now transformed from defiance into truth. Their marks flared together. A moon-shaped sigil kindled over both hearts, bright as forged metal, then settled into a soft, steady glow. "Mate," he said against her mouth, almost a prayer. "Mate," she echoed. He wrapped her in both arms and held her as the bond finished settling, no longer a snapping wire but a deep current, calm and undeniable. Around them, the last witnesses bowed their heads. Captain Mara did first, and after a brief hesitation, the sentry who had once swallowed the word near the ravine stepped forward and spoke it clearly this time. "My king, my queen." Theron's hand tightened at Evangeline's back. She felt his relief and awe move across the new link as distinctly as breath. Dawn painted the eastern stones pale rose by the time they reached the provisional court hall on the ridge, a repurposed watchkeep with long tables and open doors. No one waited for ceremony clothes. Wolves came in, travel leathers, healer aprons, guard cloaks, nursery blankets. Real life, not staged pageantry. Evangeline stood beside Theron at the front bench, while the Oath Keepers read the first reforms into law. "Blood law reclamation without ongoing consent is abolished," the senior keeper declared. "Any bond claim requires present tense verbal assent before witnesses, renewable and revocable under harm review. Quills scratched, seals pressed. No one laughed. She signed first as Luna Queen, her new mark visible at her collar. Theron signed beside her, title listed as Alpha King and co-regent, not sole sovereign. Mara signed as Commander of Guard and Interim Protector of Witness Courts. The courier who had delivered Sebastian's shard received immunity under coercion statute and accepted a post with the route wardens, trembling as he swore the oath. The temple novice and baker widow who had helped hide the pups were brought in under sanctuary protection before noon and given official caretaker stipends instead of secret guilt. Nico, Pell, and Bryn arrived sleepy, fed, and indignant about being fussed over, then were formally entered as first residents of the new sanctuary charter for rejected wolves and orphans. Before midday, a messenger from the river ford requested audience. It was the young patrol wolf, now unarmed, carrying the last unofficial copies of Sebastian's bounty notices. He surrendered them to the record fire himself. "I should have spoken sooner," he said, eyes on Evangeline. "I'm speaking now." She accepted with a nod and assigned him to map training under Mara, because Theron's line at the crossing had been right. Learn your maps before you cite law. When the final docket closed, the counterfeit stamp was transferred under seal to the Temple Tribunal. The memory shard archived with mirrored copies in 3 courts, and the restored registry page was read aloud into permanent record so it could not be cut out again without every region noticing at once. Thread by thread, the net Sebastian had built unraveled and was rewoven into something harder to corrupt. That evening, with the hall finally quiet, Evangeline and Theron stood on the west balcony overlooking torchlit courtyards where children chased one another between guard posts that now smiled when they passed. Bryn had fallen asleep on Mara's shoulder. Nico argued with Pell over whose turn it was to feed the kitchen hounds. The realm had not become perfect in a day. It had become accountable. Theron brushed his thumb over the mark at her neck. "Dawn comes soon," he murmured. Their private vow had already begun to form between them, the transformed callback to a ruined tower and a forbidden secret. Evangeline leaned into him, feeling the settled bond hum warm and steady beneath her ribs. "Say it," he said softly. She smiled, no fear left in it. "Theron Thornwood. Mine by choice." His answer came against her temple, certain and tender. "Evangeline Thornwood. Mine by choice." Below them, their pack moved in peace that had been earned, not gifted, and when moonrise found the keep, no one mistook worth for rank again.